Order, please. Before we begin the daily routine, subject for this evening's late debate was submitted by the honourable member for Sackville Beaverbank. Be it resolved that members of this House commend the community of Hammonds Plains on its commitment to seeing a new school built for this area. Be debated this evening at 6 p.m. We'll begin the daily routine presenting reading petitions. The honourable member of Cape Breton West.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the residents of Harrietsfield, Williamswood, I would like to table a petition against proposed C&D site, and the operative clause is, because of the concerns about potential drinking water contamination, lakes and waterways contamination, and environmental contamination of an abutting designated conservation area, we, the undersigned, are opposed to the approval of a construction and demolition disposal site at RDM Recycling in Harrietsfield, Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I will be affixing my signature to this, and there are approximately 900 plus signatures of homeowners that have signed this petition. Thank you.
Mr. Table. Presenting reports of committees. Table reports, regulations, and other papers. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Speaker, I would like to table for the House the original letter received from the Auditor General on the reasonableness of the 2003-2004 revenue estimates. The Auditor General's letter is identical to which was included in the budget address, which I tabled last week, released on April the 4th, 2003, with the exception of minor formatting. I've been requested to table it, and as such, Mr. Speaker, I am doing so. I have copies here for both opposition parties.
And that's an issue that I was aware of as well, and considering that the Honourable Minister of Finance has tabled that, the matter has been dealt with. Thank you. Statements by ministers. Government notice of motion. The Honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas April 9, 2003, Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day, is a day to commemorate the Holocaust. And whereas Yom HaShoah is a day to overcome prejudice, racism, bigotry, and anti-Semitism caused by the Holocaust of 1930 to 45. Whereas Yom HaShoah is a time to recognize the 6 million victims of the Holocaust who were brutally murdered and the others who fought against the Nazis to survive. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House educate our youth on the Jewish suffering of the early 1900s and continue to promote respect, understanding, and peace among cultures. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage for the debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this spring I had the opportunity to speak to 6 chambers of commerce around the province as part of my pre-budget speaking tour. Whereas over the past 5 months, I've met with various stakeholders groups, including business, union, industry sectors, and community groups as part of my annual budget consultation process. And whereas the Department of Finance places a strong emphasis on public consultation to manage the province's finances in a manner that serves the best interests of all Nova Scotians, therefore be resolved that this House congratulate and extend its thanks to the Chambers of Commerce for the opportunity to speak to Nova Scotians about the upcoming provincial budget, and to the various stakeholder groups who have offered this government input, advice, and support. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice. The question before you.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotia has one of the highest rates of cancer of all the provinces, with 24,000 Nova Scotians having cancer and 5,000 new cases of invasive cancers diagnosed each year. And whereas through a team approach to research, cancer can be beaten. And whereas a vibrant cancer research community in Nova Scotia has a direct link to quality bedside care. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate Dalhousie University on the appointment of Dr. Patrick Lee, an internationally renowned cancer researcher, to the Dr. Owen and Pearl Cameron Chair in Cancer Research. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I should move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 8 years ago, Nova Scotia's foreign currency exposure exceeded 70%. And whereas under this government, Nova Scotia's foreign currency exposure has been reduced from more than 50% to less than 20% a full 18 months ahead of schedule, and whereas the reduction of foreign-held debt generates greater fiscal stability for our province. Therefore, be resolved that this House recognize the province's goal of achieving foreign exchange exposure of 20%. And, Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and the question be put without debate.
Question for waiver? Hear no. Notice is tabled. The Honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotia's new advertising and promotional campaign for Atlantic Canada was launched yesterday, April 8th. Whereas this campaign consists of brand new television and radio ads aimed at attracting visitors from our neighbouring provinces. And whereas the Atlantic Canadian market represents over 50% of non-resident visitation to Nova Scotia. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House help spread the word about vacationing in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister. The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a private member's bill, an act to protect the dealers and vendors of farm machinery.
The Honourable Minister of Energy begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Protect the Dealers and Vendors of Farm Machinery.
And give that to the other parties, if you would, please. Bill 32, entitled An Act to Protect the Dealers and Vendors of Farm Machinery.
Or this bill be read a second time at a future date. Just before we move on to the notice of motion, just for the interest of the House, I thought it was important that, and some members probably know already anyway, but our new assistant clerk is now a new father as of March 31st. Baby girl Hillary Claire Ferguson, the mother Elizabeth McCachran. So on behalf of the House, congratulations to you and to Hillary. Notice of motion. I'll member Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move adoption of the following resolution. Whereas volunteers are the epitome of community spirit in Nova Scotia, and whereas the dedicated efforts of volunteers deserve recognition and applause, and whereas the municipality of East Hants recognizes such efforts and has named Mrs. Luella Henniger of Laddie's Brook as its 2003 provincial volunteer representative for her many years of community service in a large variety of capacities. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Mrs. Henniger for her long-standing willingness to help out where and when needed. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Atlantic Journalism Awards of Achievement will be handed out in a ceremony on May 3rd, and whereas the Atlantic Journalism Awards began in 1981 to honour journalists for their professional excellence, and this year marks the 22nd year for the Atlantic Journalism Awards. Whereas in their tireless efforts, the print, radio, and television journalists serve an important public service by providing Nova Scotians with comprehensive, timely news on issues of regional, local importance. Therefore, be it resolved that the work of all journalists who, in selflessly serving the public good, have earned the respect of members of this House. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on April 9th, Canadians remember the many sacrifices of those who fought in the Battle of Vimy Ridge on a cold Easter Monday in 1917, a battle which meant an incredible victory over what was almost an impregnable stronghold. And whereas the last veteran that took part in the Allies' victory at Vimy Ridge recently died, an infantry soldier, Charles Reaper, age 103, of Winnipeg, died only a month before the 86th anniversary of the World War I battle. And whereas for our country, this battle signified a turning point in Canada's move towards distinct nationhood. As Brigadier General Ross said, I thought then that I witnessed the birth of a nation. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this legislature join me in recognizing the significance of the Battle of Vimy Ridge for the Allies in World War I and for our nation, and express our condolences to the family and friends of Mr. Reaper, the last living link to those thousands of brave men who fought in that decisive victory. Mr. Speaker, request a waiver of notice.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth North on introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On an introduction today, I would like to bring to the attention of the House in both the East and West Gallery of a large contingent of people in the House. And I want to bring to the attention of this House, they make up councillors of the RRSS and the President Joan Jessom of NSGEU, but most importantly, the family, friends, and relatives of those individuals who are most vulnerable and those individuals who are intellectually disabled who are in the group homes, the supervised apartments, and the small options homes here in the metro area. And I would hope that you would give them a warm welcome.
We welcome the guests to the gallery today and hope they enjoy the proceedings. The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas skyrocketing auto insurance rates in Nova Scotia squeezing today's families more and more. And whereas this government refuses to consider every option available to make the system more affordable, especially the option of public auto insurance system, such as in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, British Columbia, which have the lowest rates in the country and do not discriminate on the basis of age and gender. And whereas this government says it wants to hear from Nova Scotians on the issue, and the Pictou County Council answered that call with a motion requesting that the province, and I quote, move immediately to a publicly funded auto insurance program. Therefore, be it resolved that this House congratulate the Pictou County Municipal Councillors for requesting that the province immediately implement a public auto insurance system that will benefit all Nova Scotians. I seek waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waiver, here and now. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 2003-2004 lowered taxes for a stronger economy, Nova Scotia, let's keep the debt growing, is clearly a Conservative election manifesto. And whereas this Tory propaganda cost taxpayers probably $500,000 or more to print and mail out to 380,000 households, and whereas this debt-growing Conservative government has not even released the total costs of this exercise, so the estimates given here are of a Conservative nature, resolve that the true costs to the taxpayer of sending out these Tory brochures may be $500,000 or more in immediate terms, but infinitely more if their mischievous efforts lead to the re-election of this debt-growing Tory government for another 4 years.
Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas each year 4 active commercial fish harvesters from Canada's Arctic, Atlantic, Pacific, and freshwater fisheries are recognized for their outstanding contribution to the development of responsible fishing practices with the Award for Responsible Fishing, and whereas one of these 4 recipients is further recognized with the Romeo LeBlanc Medal, and whereas Liverpool's Ulf Snarby has been awarded this highest distinction given to Canadian fishermen receiving the National Award for Responsible Fishing, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House join me in congratulating Ulf Snarby on winning the Romeo LeBlanc Medal and express our gratitude for his commitment to ensuring a strong, responsible fisheries sector in the years to come. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Boy, close one. The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Dr. Martin Willison, a longtime valued resident of Halifax Atlantic, has recently been presented with the 2002 Gulf of Maine Visionary Award. Whereas Dr. Willison has been actively involved in many community activities and projects in the Spryfield area. Whereas the Gulf of Maine Council on the Marine Environment has recognized Dr. Willison's inspiration to students and colleagues through many years of research and teaching as chair and professor of biology at Dalhousie University. Therefore, be it resolved, this House extend its congratulations to Dr. Martin Willison on being awarded the 2002 Gulf of Maine Visionary Award. And, Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice in the future day. I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Dartmouth High School's concert, jazz, and rock bands spent their March break in Cuba enjoying the sounds of salsa while performing for their Cuban peers. And whereas music teacher Terry Hill, along with 72 band members, organized this excursion to celebrate the music of different cultures. And whereas this is an incredible experience for those Dartmouth students to not only share their talents, but to experience a new culture. Therefore, be it resolved that we recognize the experience of these students, these Dartmouth High students, who have shared in Cuba, and wish them every success in the future. And I ask for waiver of notice, Mr. Speaker.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas a book chronicling the history of more than 50 one-room school houses that once dotted the landscape of Pictou West is almost ready for publishing. And whereas Doris McMillan and Laura Sears have compiled information from the Books Committee members on schools from places such as Tony River, Lansdowne, and West River Station. Whereas the proceeds from the book will go to the McCullough House properties. Its editors hope to have it published in time for the celebration of the 200th anniversary of Tom McCullough's arrival in Pictou. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate Doris McMillan, Laura Sears, and all those who participate in this worthy project and wish them success with the publication of this book. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Cole Harbour District High School has a rich and honored sports tradition. Whereas Cole Harbour District High wrestling team continues in its proud tradition. And whereas Cole Harbour won this year's senior boys wrestling title and the senior girls finished second at provincials. Therefore, be it resolved that this House congratulate the Cole Harbour District High School boys and girls wrestling teams and their coaches, Sean Kent and Ashley Clark, on a most successful season. And I ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in addition to the incredible experience for the students involved, most schools use their musicals as a fundraiser for student activities. Whereas many junior and senior high schools throughout the province are preparing for their annual school musical. And whereas a perfect example of our students will be displayed at J.L. Ilsley when they perform Cabaret, and New Glasgow High School with the performance of Les Miserables. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this House congratulate the students and teachers for their hard work and wish everyone a tremendous success. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax, Bedford Basin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Park West School has placed first in the Operation ID School Zone poster contest, and whereas this program is designed to raise awareness of the illegal sale of tobacco products to minors, especially by retailers near schools, by displaying the winning poster in corner stores throughout Metro. And whereas the efforts of Krista Leonard, Nicole White, Arbor Rexep, and Rebecca Schneiderite made the Park West School win possible. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House join me in congratulating Park West School, especially these 4 students, on winning the Operation ID School Zone poster contest and on their efforts to end tobacco use among young people. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Queens.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas reaching your centennial birthday is an accomplishment that only a lucky few get to experience, and whereas George Freeman celebrates his 100th birthday today, April the 9th, and whereas family and friends of Mr. Freeman gathered together to celebrate this momentous occasion this past Sunday and again today, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House join me in congratulating George Freeman on reaching this exceptional milestone and wish him good health and happiness in the future. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Sunday, April 6, 2003, the community of Bedford recognized the hard work and dedication of its volunteers at a special recognition dinner, and whereas this year the award was shared by two very dedicated persons, Austin McDougall and Mabel Whitman. These two individuals having risen above and beyond the norm and being recognized by their community. Whereas the event gives the opportunity for the community of Bedford to recognize and applaud the hard work of all individuals who have given their time. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House congratulate Austin McDougall and Mabel Whitman for their continued support for their community and for all those volunteers in the community who we are so greatly appreciated. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Guysborough, Port Hawkesbury.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Harbourview Guysborough County Fire Department was called upon a cold early December morning in 2002 to a house fire in Country Harbour Crossroads area, and whereas at the scene firefighters did everything humanly possible, but by this point the home's roof had already collapsed and the chimney had also fallen nearby, and whereas after a neighborhood search the scene became even more stressful when firefighters realized the homeowner never made it out of the house before it had burst into flames. Therefore, be it resolved that this legislature commend the members of the Harbourview Fire Department for their heroic efforts, as well as those of the Goshen Fire Department for supplying mutual aid assistance that tragic morning, as well as pass our condolences to the family members of the victim of the fire. And I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Galaxy Award is presented by the Canadian Cable Association for the Excellency in Information category, whereas this year's recipient is the documentary New Beginnings, the story of the ship Hector, which creates the ship's historic voyage and ends with the successful launch of its replica in 2000. Whereas this local production was produced and directed by John Muir and narrated by Sandy Mackay and filmed on location in Pictou. Therefore, be resolved that the members of this House join me in congratulating John Muir, Sandy Mackay, and all those involved in the production of A New Beginnings, the story of the ship Hector, on winning the Canadian Cable Association's Galaxy Award for 2003. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Better Business Bureau annually recognizes companies making contributions to charitable and nonprofit organizations in their community, and whereas the award winners are chosen based on their long-term commitment to the Better Business Bureau and the level of community activity performed by the company, and whereas a member of the Bureau since 1949, the Halifax Herald Limited has received the Better Business Bureau Community Achievement Award. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate the owners and staff of the Halifax Herald on the receipt of their Better Business Bureau Award and wish them continued success for the future. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas next month, pedestrians and bicyclists both will be able to enjoy the Dartmouth waterfront when the first phase of a Dartmouth walking trail opens from the Woodside Ferry Terminal to Cusack Street. And whereas this is the first phase of a 3-kilometre trail which will run from the Woodside Ferry to the downtown Dartmouth Ferry Terminal and is a project of the Waterfront Development Corporation with the support of the Halifax Regional Municipalities Community Development Fund. Whereas this trail enhances and protects public's access to the waterfront and will also enhance the planned construction of the new Nova Scotia Community College on the grounds of the Nova Scotia Hospital. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House acknowledge the enjoyment this trail will bring and endeavour to take the time to enjoy a walk along Dartmouth's beautiful waterfront. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable order, please. All member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the John Ham government has, with this year's budget, once again shown its disrespect for women's centres by refusing to provide them with increased funding, and whereas with another devastating year of budget cuts to these essential groups, the John Ham government is forcing them to further reduce the service they are able to provide. And whereas it was this Premier who recently stated that Nova Scotia is a stronger, prouder, better place than it was less than 4 years ago. Well, therefore, it be resolved that this Premier explain how, in cutting funding to women's centres year after year, his government can claim that Nova Scotia is a prouder, better place than it was 4 years ago. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for a waiver, please.
Question for waiver. Here are several noes. Noes is tabled. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas many Nova Scotia communities have recently been affected by severe flooding, including the community of Pinehurst, Lunenburg County. And whereas Pinehurst was the scene of an emergency situation whereby quick action was required by emergency personnel. And whereas Gary Penny, Kevin Weil, and Larry Vino, area residents, assisted the emergency crews' rescue efforts with the use of their backhoes, tractors, and front-end loaders. Therefore, be resolved that the members of the House of Assembly thank Gary Penny, Kevin Weil, and Larry Vino for the assistance they provided during a dangerous situation. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Countermanded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Brian McLeod, a graduate of Mount Allison University, is not only an exemplary citizen, but he is also an inspiring story of recovery from bone cancer. And whereas an Antigonish entrepreneur, community activist, and philanthropist, Mr. McLeod was named Honorary Chief of the Wakaba First Nation after serving for 3 years as their administrator, and he has been instrumental in making community colleges attractive to high school graduates. And whereas his company, the McLeod Group, now owns 5 nursing facilities, downtown buildings, as well as residential properties, and his fundraising has helped to make the Bauer Theatre at St. Avex part of Festival Antigonish. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House commend Brian McLeod on his strength in overcoming his cancer and for his selfless involvement in making his community and province a better place. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Countermanded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Allies' liberation of Holland from Nazi Germany in World War II was an important victory, marking a turning point in the conflict. And whereas Per McDougall of Inverness was one of the brave Canadians who took part in the liberation and was recently awarded the Dutch Medal. And whereas the medal was awarded to Mr. McDougall on behalf of the Dutch government. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House join me in congratulating Per McDougall on the receipt of this honour from the Government of Holland and thank him for his contribution through the Canadian Armed Forces. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice. Passage without debate.
All those in favor say aye. Countermanded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Lunenburg Falcon Adams participated in the Adam B Provincial Tournament held in Port Hood on March 21, 22, and 23. And whereas the Lunenburg Falcons were successful at the tournament and received a silver medal for their efforts. Whereas Alex Garland was named tournament MVP and Jason Mosier and Justin Corkum were named to the All-Star team during the closing ceremonies. Therefore, be resolved that the members of the House congratulate Alex Garland, Jason Mosier, Justin Corkum, Ian Mitchell, Justin Demone, Alex Galley, Andrew Baker, Evan Knickel, Jordan Keeping, Nick Strobridge, Scott Tanner, Graham Creaser, and Tyler Ritzik-Conrad of the Lunenburg Falcons for their excellent effort in winning the silver medal. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Countermanded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice, and on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Mr. Lloyd Huskelson's baseball career in Shelburne County spanned approximately 20 years between 1930 and 1950s, and whereas Lloyd Cute Huskelson was perhaps the best baseball player to ever come out of Shelburne County. And whereas Lloyd has yet to make the cut, but residents of Shelburne County believe Lloyd legitimately deserves to be inducted into Nova Scotia's Sport Hall of Fame. Therefore, be resolved that MLAs in this legislature recognize the local baseball career of Lloyd Huskelson and wish residents working on Lloyd's induction into Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame every success. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Waivers are agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Thursday, March 27, 2003, the Rotary Club of Bedford-Sackville honored one of its valued members, Bill Roy of Bedford, with the Paul Harris Fellow Award. And whereas this award is given to Rotary members who have shown great compassion for their community through volunteer work and financial contributions. And whereas this event gives the community of Bedford an opportunity to recognize the hard work of its individuals who have given their time and dedication. Therefore, be it resolved, this House congratulate Bill Roy for his continued support of the Bedford community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas reaching your centennial birthday is quite a magnificent feat that only a few get to experience, and whereas Roberta Kempton of Milton...
I thought that... Order, please. The Honourable Member, I believe that's the third resolution? Yes. You're only allowed two. Thank you. The Honourable Member of Colchester, Muscatawbin Valley, on your first one.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the federal government just announced another $232 million has been allocated towards Canada's biggest catastrophic boondoggle in this century, a national gun registry system, and whereas with the cost overruns of $1 billion or more, Canada's Federal Minister of Justice and Canada's Solicitor General, sounding more like Abbott and Costello, had the audacity to announce on February 21st in a Justice Department backgrounder, in quote, they were improving effectiveness and lowering the costs of the gun registry system, end quote, and whereas now that more than $1 billion of taxpayers' funds has disappeared like smoke in the air, the famed ministerial duo of the Justice and Solicitor General have announced a public consultation process will now take place in the spring, and they're going to consult with Canadians, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, be it resolved that this legislature, in its entirety, condemn the action of the Federal Minister of Justice and the Federal Solicitor General and urge for an immediate halt to the gun registry program. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice.
Request for waiver, heard several noes. Noes is tabled. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West on introduction.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce to you and through you to all members of the House some individual members of the Harrietsfield and Williamswood Community Association, headed by Shannon McDonald and Ian McKinnon. The residents that are here today are here obviously to follow the proceedings with regards to the rezoning issue in their community. They are seated in the West Gallery, and I would ask if all members of the House would be kind enough to afford them the appropriate recognition.
Certainly welcome our guests to the gallery today. Orders of the day are questions put by members. Question period will begin at 2:41. We'll end at 4:11. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of the NSGEU Local 66 are here today protesting the disparity between their wages working in small option homes and the wages of workers who do the same job in institutional settings. The minister has continually referred to the $28 million wage increase for these staff in an attempt to muddy the waters of this issue. In reality, the wage increase to which he is referring ended 2 years ago, and these workers haven't had an increase since. So my question for the Minister of Community Services is this: when will you stop making excuses and admit that the demands of these workers are reasonable and fair?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the member opposite gets me to point out again that when these services, these responsibilities were uploaded from the municipalities to the province, that a number of very positive things were done. One of which was that we wanted to standardize the level of care right across the province, and with that required additional training for many of the people that were involved in that sector. And with that additional training, there was a recognition, and the member is quite right, and it did cost another $28 million, which almost added 50% to this government's commitment to funding that sector.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Minister has indicated that he can't offer these workers pay equity because they do their jobs in small options home settings. The precedent has been set for long-term care nurses, rural hospital staff, the VON, and countless other groups. In those cases, it was recognized that two people who provide the same service are entitled to equitable pay regardless of where the service is delivered. When will the Minister stop using empty excuses, come to the bargaining table, and stop forcing these workers to take job action?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite once again for his question, and it does point out that as part of this new initiative, there was a recognition that there should be geographic wage equity, and in fact, that was done, Mr. Speaker. The wages were increased to $13.70 an hour, and in some cases, some of the people that came on were making as little as $6. Now, while not everybody was in that situation, it did mean a substantial commitment on the part of this government towards the care of those residents and the employees that do such a great job taking care of them.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister's words about these workers are empty unless he's prepared to follow it with some action. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, that families have had their lives turned upside down by this situation, and many of those family members are here in support of these workers because, unlike the Minister, they know the value of these devoted staff members. So my question, Mr. Speaker, for the Minister is, when will he do the right thing and take immediate action to resolve this crisis for the residents and their families?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the member opposite does point out something that is quite valid. That is that it's not only the residents that are distressed by what's going on, but it also impacts the families. And as I mentioned yesterday in this House, Mr. Speaker, I personally went over to Simpson Hall to view the arrangements that had been made in the event that there was an interruption of services. I met some of the residents, and in fact, this morning, Mr. Speaker, the member opposite would be pleased that I met with some of the members of the family. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Community Services. Over the last week or so, Mr. Speaker, I have stood in this House and asked the Minister to do one simple thing to avoid having regional residential service workers walk off the job. He could have requested a conciliation board if only he would have supported management with this request. He failed to do so, Mr. Speaker. The power was and still is in his hand to take action so residents can move back to surroundings that they're comfortable in and familiar with as soon as possible. My question to the Minister is, why is the Minister refusing to take action to ensure that the residents are cared for by individuals and surroundings that are familiar instead of disrupting their lives and the lives of their families?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, there were a number of points there that the member opposite was trying to make and a number of questions. And I would say that we're going to pick the one that is most relevant here, and that is, Mr. Speaker, that the way that the Department of Community Services is involved in this is that we fund the sector. The actual services are provided by many wonderful organizations, often with volunteer boards of directors. This is one of many of those organizations. They, in fact, Mr. Speaker, are the employer, and of course, when you get into labor negotiations, it's only appropriate that the employer and the union be at the table. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Clare on your first supplementary.
You know, Mr. Speaker, it's been a long, hard struggle trying to get this minister to understand. I find it quite interesting hearing the minister here again this afternoon taking credit for the $13.70 wage that is currently being paid to RRSS workers. Mr. Speaker, that was negotiated by a Liberal government in the last contract and not by this minister. Now, Mr. Speaker, it's time for this minister to indicate the priority he places on the residents and on the workers. And my question to the minister is, why did the minister refuse to go to the bat for the residents by demanding a fair budgeting allotment at the cabinet table?
The honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, I think that the member opposite points out that there were a lot of commitments made by the previous government. In fact, I think that it's fair to say that we got about, I think it was $3.6 billion worth of commitments from them, and that we have found means to honor those commitments and bring in a balanced budget so that we can ensure the sustainability of those services to, amongst other people, the residents served by Regional Residential Services Society. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Clare on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this minister has done nothing. You know, Mr. Speaker, when you talk about priorities, you only have to look at the minister's departmental budget to see where the priorities lie. Mr. Speaker, a rough estimate shows that this minister increased administration in his department by almost $5 million this year. That's $5 million not going directly to programs and support. My final question to the minister, Mr. Speaker, why has the minister seen administration in his department as a priority and not the residents and workers at Regional Residential Services?
The honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, I am delighted to see that the member opposite, as the critic for community services, is focusing on numbers in the budget. I know that in the last couple of sessions of the estimates, I went through a grilling that had everything to do with everything but numbers, and I look forward to accepting his questions during that time and providing him the appropriate answers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This government says that it wants to encourage immigration to the province, and yet it allows insurance companies to discriminate against people who are new to Nova Scotia, people like Michelle Renew. She recently decided to settle in Nova Scotia, but was startled to discover that in spite of her clean driving record, not even a parking ticket, she would be forced to pay $3,000 for auto insurance. Why? Because she's considered a newcomer. I'd like to ask the minister responsible for skyrocketing insurance rates, what do you plan to do about this discriminatory practice?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for the benefit of the honourable member opposite, we have a plan. We're following that plan, and as a result of that plan, Mr. Speaker, we'll bring some sanity into the insurance business.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Hey, Mr. Speaker, the plan the minister refers to is a plan to do consultation by somebody they haven't even hired yet, Mr. Speaker. That can only loosely be referred to as a plan. Mr. Speaker, Michelle Renew is just one example. The government is allowing insurance companies to discriminate, and I'd like to table the letter and insurance bill Michelle Renew sent to my office. She has been classified as a high-risk driver because she hasn't had insurance in Canada or the U.S. for the last 4 years. It doesn't matter that Michelle Renew is 50 years of age, been driving most of her life, has a clean record. What matters is she is new to Nova Scotia. My question for the Minister of skyrocketing insurance rates is this: why are you doing nothing and allowing insurance companies to discriminate against the people of this province?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member well knows, there's just been completed a review of insurance rates by the Utility Review Board, and we await with interest the results of that examination.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the minister that thinks that insurance rates are low in Manitoba because the roads are flat should know that the URARB did not discuss this issue. Insurance rates are using every trick in the book to gouge Nova Scotians, rates are skyrocketing, and discrimination is on the rise. Yet the minister responsible for skyrocketing insurance rates refuses to act. Minister, many of the underwriters involved in this practice don't live in Nova Scotia, and many not even in Canada. How can it possibly be fair that these underwriters are classifying drivers new to Nova Scotia as a high risk?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I find it passing strange that the leader of the New Democratic Party, who spent about 3 months, I believe, running around the countryside talking to fellow New Democrats, the only solution that he was able to come up with is for the government to set up its own insurance company in competition with the private sector. We do not intend to do that.
The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister has been very elusive in the past as to whether or not all health money from Ottawa will actually be spent on health care. Speaker, the Bank of Montreal Economic Branch issued a commentary on the budget in which it pointed out that a $2 billion one-time transfer was going to be available to the Canadian provinces from Ottawa for health care that, ironically, Nova Scotia has not included in their budget. Mr. Speaker, the fact is that Nova Scotia's share, based on our population, would be about $60 million. Other provinces, Mr. Speaker, have included their share of the $2 billion in their budgets. Therefore, my question to the Minister is, could the Minister of Finance inform the House why Nova Scotia has kept the $60 million from the budget numbers?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I find it interesting that the Liberal Party would like for us to I guess, spend all the $12 billion, our portion of the $12 billion, most of it in the first year. Mr. Speaker, in this year we have taken in 1/3 of the revenues that the federal government is going to be putting into the provinces, which is $12 billion. Mr. Speaker, one-third of that is in this year. The $60 million that he's referring to is a conditional payment that the federal government will make if they have a surplus in this year. Mr. Speaker, it is clear our intention as a government that if that surplus is paid, that the provisions will be made by the federal government that those funds will go into next year rather than this year. That will allow for the funds to be equally shared over the first 3 years of the 3 years of the agreement, so that we don't suddenly have a lot of revenues in one year and less in the next. We don't want to hire people, Mr. Speaker, to fire them the next year. That is our approach, and that differs with the Liberal Party.
The member for Richmond on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the fact is, as I said, other provinces have included that in their budget. In fact, other provinces under Tory administrations have done this. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians shouldn't have to look up economic papers from banks in order to find out where health dollars are located. Mr. Speaker, what happened to openness and accountability?
Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member for Richmond has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, if you add the $60 million that is coming from Ottawa for health, along with the $8 million from Ottawa for housing that the province is withholding, all of a sudden the province has a $68 million cushion. Ironically, Mr. Speaker, $68 million is exactly the amount that's going to cost for the 155 tax rebate scheme that the Tories have proposed. Therefore, I ask again, does the Minister of Finance not believe that health and housing need $68 million, or is he just withholding the money to pay for his tax scheme?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I used to have debates with the former finance critic from that party, and there were days that I suddenly questioned his theory. Well, Mr. Speaker, as I see now, he wasn't that bad, obviously. Mr. Speaker, we have not included those revenues in our estimates, Mr. Speaker, because of the fact that those payments are conditional. I've stated very clearly that if we are to receive those, that the federal government will work with our province and also with the province of British Columbia, which also incorporates GAP, to ensure that those funds will go into next year. It is our intention to level out the funding so that we don't get all the money in one year to have less the next. That is not in the best interest of this province. And if the Liberal Party espouses that, let them stand up and say, because this party does not agree.
Member Richmond on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, how ironic that the minister says he's not going to spend healthcare dollars from Ottawa now. We see emergency health rooms closed. We see longer waiting lines to get surgeries. We have homeless people on the streets freezing, yet the minister sits back and holds $68 million of both housing money and health money for his rainy day rebate fund. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians are concerned that this government is taking money that is slated for health care and instead putting it in a rebate scheme which is clearly meant to curry favour with Nova Scotia voters. My question again is, will the minister clearly make a commitment today that any new money from Ottawa for health care will be specifically spent in health and not on your re-election scheme?
Now, Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I've never seen so many misrepresentation of the facts. In this budget, we have $105 million which has been received from the Ottawa, and we have spent $140 million, Mr. Speaker. The member opposite saying that there's nothing in this budget to lower waiting lists, Mr. Speaker. That is not the facts. We gave $5 million to the district health authorities to reduce waiting lists, and we also gave $5 million to the Capital Health Region for the cardiac program to reduce waiting lists. We put the money where we said, Mr. Speaker. The health money went for health plus additional funds. That's what we told the people, and that's what we did, and that is not what the member opposite is portraying. That is not the facts.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Health's website lists several nursing positions around the province. As nursing students have indicated, most of the listings in the metro area are for part-time, temporary, or casual work. Even in rural communities, where there is supposed to be a wealth of full-time work, many positions are temporary or part-time. Some pay as little as $771 every 2 weeks. So I want to ask the Minister of Health, why are there so many casual, permanent part-time, and temporary positions around the province?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, there are many vacancies around the province. Some of them are casual, some of them are temporary, some of them are full-time, some of them are for experienced nurses, and some are for graduates. And as I've said several times in the last few days, there is not an absolute match between the number of graduates and the number of positions available. But Mr. Speaker, there are jobs for nurses in Nova Scotia, and I would ask with sincerity that graduates of Dalhousie and other nursing schools apply for those jobs and stay here in Nova Scotia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, it was only less than 4 short years ago that when this group over here were campaigning for government, they were promising to address the nursing shortage by creating more full-time jobs. Several hospitals have multiple part-time, casual, and temporary jobs listed. Perhaps the nursing graduates would be more enticed to relocate to rural hospitals if the positions offered a little more security and a living wage. So I want to ask the Minister of Health, why hasn't your government addressed the overabundance of short-term nursing positions around the province?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, we have addressed the issue and continue to address the issue of permanent nursing jobs versus part-time and temporary nursing jobs. But the fact remains that some hospitals require some ability to work with contract positions and temporary positions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
You know, apparently, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Health doesn't understand the contradiction. The government is spending more money to train nurses, but they won't give the district health authorities enough money to hire them into full-time permanent positions. So we're essentially training nurses for Texas and Alberta and for other jurisdictions where they will have that kind of job security. Unless something is done, we will continue to train even more nurses that will leave the province. So my question for the Minister of Health is this. How can you demand high training, force students to accumulate crushing debt load, and then expect them to accept a part-time job that pays less than $400 a week?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as everyone in this House knows, our nursing strategy was developed by nurses for nurses. The strategy is working. The fact remains that there are many different types of vacancies in Nova Scotia. I wish we didn't have any vacancies, but Mr. Speaker, it is not true, as the member says, that it is lack of funding that is causing this problem. There are funded positions in several of the DHAs that are not being filled because at this time they are unable to match their needs with the requirements of some of the nurses who are graduating. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Hants East.
Johnny. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question will be for the Minister of Transportation and Public Works. Mr. Speaker, the Canadian Institute of Health Information reports that the number of young people injured while using all-terrain vehicles has risen dramatically in Nova Scotia. From 1996 to 2001, the accident rate for ATVs rose by 63% in this province. It's now the third highest rate in Canada. Many of these ATV accidents involve young drivers, including children. Nova Scotia sets the age limit at 14, but there's a huge loophole that allows children as young as 10 to operate ATVs. So my question to the Minister, why won't you step in and immediately increase the age at which children can begin operating ATVs so you can at least reduce, or if not eliminate injury to children on these vehicles?
Hear, hear, John.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much. I thank the honourable member for the question. All-terrain vehicles, off-highway vehicles, as they're more accurately known, are not the responsibility of the Department of Transportation and Public Works. And I would refer the question to the Deputy Premier.
Now, Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, there is no confusion about this, but the ATV problem that we have in this province, and which other provinces have as well, is a problem that's shared by the Minister of Tourism, the Minister of Natural Resources, the Minister of Environment and Labour, the Minister of Transportation, etc. We are coming up, Mr. Speaker, with a common strategy for ATV riders and for the use and abuse of ATVs, and we expect to have an announcement in the very near future.
Now, Member Hants East, on your first supplementary.
Thank both the ministers for their answer.
All four of them.
I'll redirect this question again to the Minister of Transportation and see where it lands, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps I can help with the strategy the minister's trying to come up with, because I know that I've raised this with the minister a couple of years ago, and I'm still waiting. The number of children being injured on ATVs is frightening. It's so frightening that the Nova Scotia Trauma Registry has sounded the alarm, Mr. Speaker. Yet in Nova Scotia, children as young as 10 years of age are allowed to operate an ATV. As this recreation grows in popularity, the number of injuries will increase proportionally. In the face of this, why has the minister stood by and done nothing as children continue to drive all-terrain vehicles with very little restriction?
Hear, hear.
Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, and as indicated earlier, I refer that to the Deputy Premier.
The Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the age at which children can ride on ATVs, I would say, more properly belongs with the parents of those children. And, Mr. Speaker, because most ATVs are operated on land that is owned by the owner of the ATVs, we have no control whatsoever over those particular children driving ATVs. We do not certainly recommend it.
The honourable member Hants East, on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the minister should know he's been a member of governments certainly longer than I have, and I want him to recognize the power that this government has to address issues like this.
Hear, hear.
That's what people expect their governments to do. Many provinces have imposed minimum ages for the operation of an ATV. Most restrict use by those under 14. Others set the minimum age at 16. I know the minister must consider this a serious problem, and I asked him what is he going to do and when is he going to do it.
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, we will be doing something in the very near future, and I'm not just trying to waylay the member, because I recognize that there's a problem. I think every thinking person in the province recognizes there's a problem with ATVs. We have 40,000 people who own ATVs in Nova Scotia, and I don't know how many beyond that number that actually ride ATVs, Mr. Speaker. It's a massive problem, and it's one that has to be addressed. Other provinces are having the same problem trying to address that particular difficulty. As I said, we have formed a committee representing various departments, and as a result of that, Mr. Speaker, we will be coming forward with a strategy in the very near future.
The honourable member Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, earlier today I tabled a petition with 900 names for residents in the Harrietsfield area who are quite concerned about the government allowing the expansion of a recycling dump in their community. Mr. Speaker, they have serious concerns, environmental concerns, safety concerns, noise concerns, home valuation, property concerns. So given the fact that the government says it's open and accountable, my question quite simply to the Minister of Environment and Labour is, what assurances can you give the people, not only that are here in the gallery, but to all the residents in Harrietsfield, that you are prepared to listen to their concerns and order an environmental site assessment on this particular issue?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, several years ago, about 3 years ago, or 4 years ago possibly, HRM set up a series of meetings and public consultations to come up with a construction and demolition debris management strategy. And they did so, Mr. Speaker, and finally actually licensed, I believe, with 3 sites in the city of Halifax. Mr. Speaker, they did that without consultation with the Department of Environment initially, but the Department of Environment did become involved. And Mr. Speaker, at the present time, there's a consultation process underway with the residents of the area.
I'll remember Cape Breton West on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, presently the Ombudsman is looking into this situation, and we're waiting for her report coming back. Contrary to what the Minister has said, the residents in the community have been trying to seek some answers from the government and this Minister on various issues, particularly soil analysis. They have not been able to get the results of the hydrogeological analysis, even if there has been one done, which we have no information on that. They haven't been able to find out what the soil analysis has been. Despite what the Minister has said, experts at HRM have recommended against this site. So my question to the Minister is, would he be prepared to table the results of the soil analysis that has been done by the government on this particular site?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not aware of what has been done on site, to be quite honest, with regard to studies of the soil in the area. I do know that HRM, however, did approve this site for the accumulation and disposal of construction and demolition debris.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the residents have some genuine concerns about the safety of their water supply. We have more than 900 families in that community who could be adversely affected, not only with the quality of their water, but the safety for their children going to school. We have a licensed real estate company has indicated quite clearly that there'll be a negative adverse effect should this proposal go forth. My question to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, is what are you going to do to protect the residents in that community and stop hiding behind bureaucratic red tape?
Honourable Minister of the Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, at the present time we are still receiving from the residents of that area responses to our request for information from the area residents, and I believe that process is completed in 2 or 3 days from now.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, you'll remember that the Premier and his merry band of misguided followers promised that they would be providing an open, transparent, and compassionate government. Well, Mr. Speaker, I've taken a look at the most recent taxpayer-funded Tory propaganda piece. Mr. Speaker, it's rather glossy, but it glosses over some very important information. For example, Mr. Speaker, it doesn't tell the approximately 300,000 poorest adult Nova Scotians that they will not be receiving the Premier's $155 vote Tory enhancement, Mr. Speaker. So my question to the Premier, through you, Mr. Speaker, is could the Premier tell Nova Scotians, because I'm sure he would like to ensure that there is clarity on this matter, will he be putting out a supplement to explain to the poorest Nova Scotians, the approximately 300,000 people who will receive nothing, to explain to them why you do not believe that they are worthy of assistance?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the initiatives of this government was to provide economic stimulation. The way to combat poverty, Mr. Speaker, is to provide an economy that provides everybody that opportunity to work and work in a good job. And one of the initiatives that we have, and through the tax rebate that will be in the hands of Nova Scotians in June, it will provide an immediate infusion into our economy of almost $70 million and should keep the good times rolling.
The Honourable Member Sackville-Cobequid on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, what the Premier is hoping is for the good times to keep rolling for him, not for the people of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, the Premier should know that the wealthiest, they're the ones who are most likely to be spending the money outside of the province of Nova Scotia. The poor, those who have to decide between food and heat, those people will be spending that money here in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, the wealthiest will get it, the poor are to get nothing. My question through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, is that the Tory view of a fair and just society?
Order, please. Order, please. Did the Honourable Premier hear the question? No. Order, please. Would the Honourable Member for Order. Order, please. Obviously, the House enjoyed the Honourable Member's questions. I'd like to hear it again. The question only, please.
People on the other side of the street could hear it. Mr. Speaker, quite clearly, those who have the higher incomes will be receiving, but those who are the very poorest will receive nothing. My question through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, softly so he can hear it, is that the Tory view of a fair and just society?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and may I respond to the well-meaning member that regardless of what your tax payment to the government is, you get the $155. It doesn't matter. Everybody gets the same.
Now, Member Sackville-Cobequid on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, maybe the Premier should read his own tax documents, because then maybe the Premier would find out. Maybe he would realize that what he is saying is misguided, Mr. Speaker. It's inaccurate. Mr. Speaker, we have many Nova Scotians who are paying HST on their higher heat costs, on all kinds of things, but who maybe, Mr. Speaker, they are disabled, they're on low fixed incomes, maybe, Mr. Speaker, they're the ones who are working, receiving the minimum wage, but their incomes are so low they don't deserve, or don't qualify, I should say, for this, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Premier, we have seen this one piece of Tory propaganda, and we know that the Premier is PR flax and his strategists are preparing for the election campaign. My question to the Premier is, how many more of these taxpayer-funded propaganda pieces are you planning to have the taxpayers pay for before the next election, instead of providing help to those who really need it?
Order, please. Just before the Honourable the Premier answers, on a couple occasions today, members have held up documents in the House which are purported in the House to be props, and I'd ask the Honourable members to. You can refer to it all you want, just don't hold it up. The Honourable the Premier.
He's got it. He's got vision.
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I can assure the long-serving member opposite that if there ever was any doubt as to whether or not the people of Nova Scotia should be informed about what it is doing in terms of tax reform and providing the commitment that it made to the people of Nova Scotia, then the member opposite has provided absolute confirmation that we had to do it because he doesn't understand it. How can we expect Nova Scotians, who get far less information than the member opposite, to understand it? That's why those documents go out.
Now, Member Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions are to be directed to the Premier through you, if I could, please. You know, Mr. Speaker, this is a time when government refuses to properly fund the Avalon Sexual Assault Centre. It's a time when it takes millions from affordable housing. But, Mr. Speaker, not everyone's losing out. This is also a time when the Minister of Health has jacked up her propaganda campaign by almost 30%. The Minister of Communication jacked his communication budget by more than 10%. Environment and Labour has public relations spending up by 35%, and Finance increased its communication budget by about 25%. So my question through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier is, I would like to know, why have you decided that how people perceive your government is more important than properly funding critical services like the Avalon Sexual Assault Centre?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And it would appear that the member opposite is asking a question about the assault centre, and I would refer that to the Minister.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Avalon, funding for Avalon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think the House knows that the majority of the funding for the Avalon Sexual Assault Centre comes through community services. But, Mr. Speaker, I will say that the Department of Health has been funding a project with a nurse practitioner for the past 3 years that has probably been increasing the workload at Avalon. So we will be discussing with the Avalon Sexual Assault Centre what the Health Department might be able to do to assist them in their funding. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Prospect on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I'll try the Premier again, if I could, please. The Premier's staff includes 3 public relations staff, including 2 managers of communication. You got to be managed these days. You got to be spun. The Department of Health has had as many as 4 PR flacks this past year, and heaven knows what happens with the Department of Education and who's spinning out of control there. There are now about 50 public relation types working for this government, and I'd like to table that list, if I could please, who are in that business. My question to the Premier is this: is it really worth all this taxpayers' money to try to convince Nova Scotians that you're doing something? Wouldn't it be easier just to put it into the proper programs so that Nova Scotians could benefit directly?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And that question should be directed to the Minister responsible for Communications Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I actually appreciate the question by the honourable member. Mr. Speaker, it's very important that government communicate with Nova Scotians in a timely way, that they provide the information to Nova Scotians that they request and they require. People, the honourable members opposite, are constantly telling this government about their failure to respond in a timely way to what Nova Scotians are asking. This government is making every effort, Mr. Speaker, to respond in a timely way with the information Nova Scotians are requesting.
The Honourable Member for Timberley Prospect on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it's time for a history lesson. This government has spent more than $200,000 on Bill 68 and other advertising. They spent more than $50,000 on long-term care advertising, and now they're spending $150,000 on this latest round of politically motivated ads. Yet on page 18 of the Blue Book, it's this Premier who stated he would have no more of politically motivated advertising. So my question to the Premier is, which of your 50 public relation types will you call upon to explain yet another one of your broken commitments?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I refer that to the Minister responsible for Communications, Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure that the honourable member understands the importance of communicating with Nova Scotians, and I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, we do. And also, Mr. Speaker, my understanding is that, in fact, this administration has fewer communicators than the former administration did, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Tourism and Culture. Mr. Speaker, in today's Chronicle Herald, we see a photo of our Premier. I'd like to table a copy of that photo, Mr. Speaker. Ironically, the Premier has his back facing us, Mr. Speaker, and it's no wonder that his back is facing us because this government has turned its back on musicians and songwriters and artists in this province, Mr. Speaker. We read below that photo an interesting article about how the government is advertising our province and has spent $15,000 to pay a band from Great Britain, a band called Jesus Jones, Mr. Speaker. Now, my question, Mr. Speaker, is why, Mr. Speaker, If the members of the New Democratic Party want to check
Order,
the
please.
pronunciation, they'll find out they're wrong.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay on his question.
My question to this government and to this minister is, why did the government pay $15,000 of taxpayers' money to a foreign band at the expense of our homegrown talent? Mr. Speaker, I want to know from this minister how, why, and when that minister found Jesus Jones.
The Honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Oh, God, Mr. Speaker, what a question. Yeah, I don't know how I'm going to fiddle my way to this one. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the member. Mr. Speaker, I can assure the member that the musicians used with the song were from Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Glace Bay on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that we'll support that if that's the case. But I want to know from the minister, I want to know why a foreign song was chosen. I want to know why we couldn't rise again, Mr. Speaker. I want to know why we can't fly on our own in this province, Mr. Speaker. And I want to know, and I want, certainly we wouldn't say to our musicians farewell to Nova Scotia, as this minister has done, and to all the incredible talent. So my next question to the minister is, can the minister explain why such bands as Crush and Sloan and the Cotters and J.P. Cormier and Rita McNeil and Natalie McMaster, why aren't they good enough to get the $15,000? And why don't you care about local talent, Mr. Minister?
Order, please. Honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. There's so many things to say, I better not say them all. But, Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, we use musicians from Nova Scotia with regard to the song. Mr. Speaker, of course, the rights to the song are owned outside the province, but, Mr. Speaker, we follow through on those obligations. Hundreds of songs were looked at, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the song being used. This was determined, Mr. Speaker, using a very aggressive consultation process with respect to an outside group, Mr. Speaker. That is the correct song, I believe, for the commercial, Mr. Speaker.
No member for Glace Bay on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's get serious. What a disgrace. What a disgrace.
Order, please. Order, please. Oh, no member for Glace Bay has the floor.
Artists. When you treat Nova Scotia artists this way, it's shameful. Now, the Minister of Tourism and Culture, Mr. Speaker, who is a musician of some note, I will grant, is way off key when it comes to this issue. I want to ask the Minister, Mr. Speaker, I want this Minister to sing a new tune, and I want this Minister to change those decisions and for once support the artists and songwriters and musicians of Nova Scotia, reverse that decision and give them the $15,000, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, if that member, Mr. Speaker, is referring to people like Bruce Jacobs and Scott Ferguson and Dave McIsaac as musicians who do not deserve the opportunity to play in that type of commercial for Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, it's unbelievable, Mr. Speaker. I think it's time for the member to sail away.
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. I'm just a little sorry the all member doesn't have another supplementary. The all member Timberlea Prospect.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question's for the Premier. I've learned that this Premier plans to spend $90,000 on this latest round of pre-election budget print and radio ads. And one of the latest ads broadcast in Cape Breton features that part-time stand-up comic, part-time fiddler, and Minister of Tourism, Rodney MacDonald. The Premier who vowed not to spend taxpayer dollars on politically motivated advertising is spending more than $155,000 on this latest ad campaign alone. So my question's to the Premier, not to the Minister of Communication, Nova Scotia, certainly not to the fiddler from Inverness. Will you explain, Mr. Premier, to Nova Scotians why you've broken your word about such advertising?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the government has a department called Communications Nova Scotia. The department has a minister. If the member opposite wants to ask questions about that budget, he asks the minister. And I would ask the minister to respond to the member opposite.
No, Minister of Transportation and Public Works. Obviously, it's not a budget question, but
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, is the advertisement that the honourable member is referring to is one that was playing with the honourable Minister of Communication, the honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture on it? That's the one?
The all member Timberlea Prospect on your first supplementary.
I guess I ask them or I answer them now, but Mr. Speaker, I'd like to draw again to the Premier's attention to a resolution that he presented in this House of June of 1999. In 1999, Premier Ham condemned the then Liberal government, the current third party in this House, for using valuable taxpayers' dollars to fund a PR campaign. He said the Liberal government was being wasteful, inappropriate, and offensive for spending more than $100,000 on an advertising campaign. Yet now we have $150,000 in the last month and a half on your own PR campaign. Mr. Premier, how can you justify such hypocrisy?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The one thing you can never accuse this government of is being wasteful, but I would refer the question to the minister responsible for communications, Nova Scotia.
Well, for Communications, Nova Scotia.
Thank you very much. And you know, Mr. Speaker, this is kind of tribute today, a day that should be a tribute to opposition researchers. And it's a day that opposition researchers all over this province should wonder about. Because the advertisement that the member is referring to is an advertisement that was placed on the radio on behalf of the Minister of Tourism and Culture by himself and was not paid for by the Government of Nova Scotia.
Now, Member Timberley Prospect on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, my question is again for the Premier. This is the man in charge of these dollars. This is, after all, the very Premier who stood in this House in a holier-than-thou approach that he has used in the past, condemned the government at the time for such financing. He promised Nova Scotians that public funds would be not used for political advertising. Mr. Premier, why can you make a promise then in opposition and now you can't keep it?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the red face of the member opposite indicates he knows he's being bested. So I will give the minister responsible for Communication Nova Scotia another crack at the member opposite.
The Honourable Minister responsible for Communication Nova Scotia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know, the difficulty with the whole premise of his question is that it's basically wrong. And the honourable member knows that this is advertisement that was taken out by the minister as a member. He's not doing it in the behalf of the government. And the honourable member should offer an apology for the wrong information to the minister involved.
The Honourable Member Cape Breton Nova.
Mr. Speaker, may I?
Nova.
Mr. Speaker, I was sitting over here reading larger stronger debt, but I put that aside and in turn.
The Honourable Member Cape Breton Nova has the floor.
Volume called the Nova Scotia Workers' Compensation Program.
Order, please. Order, please. Now, the Honourable Member just heard me a few minutes ago rule out of order anybody using props in the House. I'd asked them, you can refer to them but not hold them up in the House, as the member would well know. So, we'll hold them down and read them. You don't have to hold them up for the House. Thank you. Two rookies. The Honourable Member Cape Breton Nova has the floor.
Demonstrate that they're both printed in the same color of ink. That's the point I wanted to make.
Thank you.
Now, this is a government publication. It's already been tabled in the House by the minister when it was tabled, and it's concerning the Workers' Compensation Program. 380 pages long.
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Member, I would ask again, in respect to the chair, put the book down, put the question, or I'll call for another speaker.
Well, I'll refer to what's in the document, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Minister of Labour knows all 380 pages of the document full well, so I won't go through it page by page. But I do want to ask the Minister of Labour if he can update the House on his progress in terms of investigating the applicability of the Supplementary Benefits Program to new entrants. Now, I advised the House earlier that they cannot get into the program.
That was the question. The Honourable Member, order, please. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll take that question under advisement.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Nova on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as a first supplementary, I might say that the recommendation from the report that's under my tabletop, the recommendation in that report, recommendation number 7, at the summary of recommendations, stated that this program of supplementary benefits should be combined with an updating of the cost of living adjustment on workers' compensation payments from 50% to 100% of the increasing cost of living. Could the minister update the House on his progress on that particular recommendation with respect to implementation?
I think we've gone from Opposition Day to Entertainment Day. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I'll take that under advisement as well. And when I say that, Mr. Speaker, there's a large number of recommendations in that report, which as the honourable member well knows, are under review at the present time. And exactly at what stage of review they're at, I'll have to check with the Workers' Compensation Board.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova, and your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, with respect and deference, I might say that report was tabled here in this House 13 months ago. 13 months ago. So there's kind of been a bit of time passed since then for the government to determine its response. And I'd like to ask the minister, with reference to the other recommendations that are contained in that report, all 390 pages of recommendations, if he could indicate on those whether any of them are going to be implemented, particularly between now and the upcoming dissolution of the House.
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I met with the president of the Workers' Compensation Board just recently, and we discussed the report, and indeed there will be something coming forth later this year in the form of legislation. And when we have a date for that, Mr. Speaker, I'll be pleased to advise the honourable member.
The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Transportation. People in the Windsor area were surprised to learn this morning that a 4-kilometre stretch through the area will be skipped over when the 101 is twinned through to Avonport. And I will table pages from the Minister of Transportation's briefing book, which says the reason for skipping over the Windsor twinning is because they haven't yet decided how to deal with the controversial causeway issue. So I want to ask the Minister of Transportation to admit that his government is leaving the Windsor section of the 101 untwinned because the former Minister of Transportation didn't want to make it a difficult political decision on the eve of an election campaign.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Speaker, the honourable member isn't doing very well today. The reason, Mr. Speaker, that section of the road is not proceeding at the present time, but which will be proceeding very shortly, is because there's a federal environmental assessment. This is the area where it's known as the Causeway, I believe, in Windsor. And as the honourable member would know, this is a sensitive environmental area. We have to do the environmental studies before the federal funding can flow. And Mr. Speaker, that is the reason that gap is there. But I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, we are absolutely committed to filling the gap as soon as possible, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member Timberley Prospect on your first supplementary.
4 years of environmental review. I will table pages from the safety review this government conducted in the 101. That very section of the 101 had the worst collision rates on that highway from 90 to 99. This is a winding section of road whose danger is signaled by reduced speeds. And as the previous minister whispers an answer in your ear, instead of using the dangerous layout of the Windsor Road as a reason for twinning, the minister's briefing note uses an excuse not to twin. My question to the Minister of Transportation, of all places and all excuses, how could you possibly have decided that the Windsor stretch should go untwinned after 4 years of environmental review?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
You know, it strikes me as a tad ironic that the honourable member from the party he cometh should be arguing that we should proceed without an environmental assessment to twin the road. But you know what, Mr. Speaker? I can tell the honourable member one simple fact. We will twin that section of Highway 101.
Honourable Member for Timberley Prospect on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I remember that campaign literature, and I read it well because the MLA from Hants West said it would be twinned. He said it would be twinned, and it would be twinned immediately. It's incredibly ironic that the former Minister of Transportation, a man who has led this government's decision-making on the 101, would choose to leave the heart of his own riding untwinned. Let me give you the real answer, Mr. Speaker. This government is leaving Windsor untwinned for one simple reason. The community is split over how to deal with the causeway, and the former minister doesn't want to make a controversial political decision when he is seeking re-election. So I want the Minister of Transportation to listen to the question as opposed to his seatmate. I want him to know, why did you choose bad politics over good sense when dealing with the lives of people driving through Windsor?
Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Well, thank you very much. And you know, the honourable member has one little problem with the premise. It's wrong. In fact, Mr. Speaker, the warden and the mayor of the town of Windsor support the decision to proceed to do the other sections and to catch up once the environmental assessment has been received for the sensitive environmental area, so that the project will proceed quickly down the valley as we committed.
The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Community Services. We've seen that this minister has taken $9 million out of provincial housing programs, while at the same time the federal government has increased their funding by $11 million. However, Mr. Speaker, this minister says he is keeping the $9 million now, but plans to spend it sometimes this year. Mr. Speaker, this is a shameful act by this minister, and we will hold him to that commitment to spend that money. My first question to the minister is, could the minister please reveal his social housing plan for rural Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member opposite for his statements and his questions, and I'm going to pick one. First of all, he made a suggestion that this is additional federal funding that's flowing through into the department. Actually, the funding comes from the Nova Scotia Housing Development Corporation, where we built up a surplus, and that's where the funding is coming from. But the funding has to be targeted to public housing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Clare, on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this minister knows he is responsible for the housing needs of all Nova Scotians. People in rural Nova Scotia deserve to know how much they can expect to receive for their housing needs. Mr. Speaker, as you're aware, last September, a $37.26 million 5-year affordable housing agreement was announced. Now, people in rural Nova Scotia deserve to know, again, how much they can expect to receive for their housing needs. My question to the minister is, can this minister please inform the House how much money each of the next 5 years will be allocated for new social housing units in rural Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And what the member opposite refers to is the affordable housing agreement with the federal government. And in fact, it is that amount. It's a matching arrangement between the federal and the provincial government. And the target amount is 1,500 new units, or the equivalent. And that will be dispersed based on need across the province over the ensuing 5 years. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Clare, on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, just what I thought. There is either no plan, or there are so few dollars being allocated to rural Nova Scotia by this government that to reveal the amount would be an embarrassment. And I'll try again. If you are not planning to develop many new housing units in rural Nova Scotia, could you please indicate how much you are planning to spend for renovations and upgrades to social housing units in rural Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I think that the member opposite knows that sort of thing, that we look forward to answering the estimates. But as long as he's brought up the subject, Mr. Speaker, isn't it great that last year the former minister got to go to Middleton, make the first public housing announcement in over 10 years, 15 new units for the people of Middleton and the area, and we look forward to many more of those announcements over the term of the agreement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Halifax Needham. Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Health, and let's keep talking about Middleton, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government announced with great fanfare last year that Soldiers Memorial Hospital would be turned into a day center of excellence. Subsequently, tens of thousands of dollars were spent to upgrade the operating room and to renovate the former medical and maternity units. What didn't happen, Mr. Speaker, is that this government forgot to ask anyone at the Valley Regional Hospital if they were willing to travel to Middleton to work in that centre of excellence. So I want to ask the minister if she could justify the spending of precious health dollars on a day surgery that is practically not utilized at all.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the DHA intended to upgrade that surgery so that indeed that Centre of Excellence could exist and operate. Now, a number of things have happened. A surgeon has left the area to go to Kentville. But Mr. Speaker, the plan is still to use that hospital for day surgery. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Halifax Needham on your first supplementary.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the head of the Valley District Health Authority has told Middleton town officials that full-time surgery is probably history in their community. The Tory government built a day surgery centre of excellence, but nobody came, Mr. Speaker. No surgeons came, and the minister and the government would have known that had they bothered to ask. I want to ask the Minister of Health, your department spent the money on a project without a plan, and now the Centre of Excellence is hardly used. What answers can you offer the citizens of Middleton?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons the day surgery unit was built there was to take some of the pressure off Kentville. I think the member opposite knows well that Kentville is a very, very busy hospital. It may even need more beds. And Mr. Speaker, because a plan not invented by the Tory government but requested by the DHA is not fully implemented right at this moment, does not mean it's not going to be implemented and does not mean it's not going to work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham on your final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I remember all too well the position that the DHA and the Valley were put in last year by the former Minister of Health. The Day Surgery Centre of Excellence in Middleton might win awards for its cleanliness, Mr. Speaker, but it's not going to be winning any awards for saving lives anytime soon. People in the Western Valley now drive up to 90 minutes to get necessary medical treatment. Will the Minister of Health admit that the Middleton Centre of Excellence is nothing more than a centre of empty promises?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the member opposite knows full well that most day surgery is not performed in the same way as emergency surgery is. That day surgery is increasing in all our hospitals across this country because more and more procedures don't require overnight hospitalization. And Mr. Speaker, that unit is going to be used for day surgery, and residents of the Valley and the town are going to find it very, very useful, and they're going to be able to take pride in it when it's fully operational. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton and the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Honourable Member for Cape Breton and the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Health. Despite recent good news announcements by both the federal and the provincial governments, residents of Cape Breton and the Lakes continue to express concern to me in regard to the emergency department at the Northside General Hospital. My question to the Minister, can the Minister assure these residents of Cape Breton and the Lakes that these fears are unwarranted?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I think the member from Cape Breton and the Lakes knows that the health authority in his area is run by one of the most respected CEOs in the province, perhaps the country. And there are issues up there that they are all grappling with, but I can assure him that Mr. Malcolm and his government and this department do care about the future of hospitals in his area and will take every care to see that residents are served. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton and the Lakes on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I agree with the minister in regard to the administration, but I would remind the minister that the administrators require the tools necessary to get the job done. Mr. Speaker, staff levels continue to be a concern at the Northside General. And in the Waterford, and Glace Bay, and Bedeck, and Richmond County, at the Buchanan Memorial Hospital. All are feeling insecure and expressing concern with regard to funding allotments and that sort of thing, decisions that are made here, right here in downtown Halifax. My question, what can the minister tell members of this House in regard to the activity she has initiated since becoming the new Minister of Health to securing and increasing staff levels at these troubled facilities?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, what we've seen in the last few years is an unprecedented level of cooperation between local authorities and the Department of Health, principally under the direction of the Associate Deputy Minister Cheryl Doran. And Mr. Speaker, we can't guarantee everything in healthcare or any other field, but what we have guaranteed is multi-year funding of 7% to each of the DHAs, increasing year after year, as well as guaranteeing that we will pay for increased salary costs. And this kind of stability is precisely the kind of thing that will allow local authorities to deal with problems as they come up in each hospital or each area in the service they provide. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member Cape Breton Lakes on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my final supplementary is also to the Minister of Health. Wait times for surgery in particular continue to increase for residents in Cape Breton Lakes and surrounding communities, Mr. Speaker. Residents requiring medical attention here in Halifax, the wait list grows and the waiting time lengthens. This creates unnecessary stress for families in a medical crisis. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister. Can the Minister indicate to members of this House just exactly how she intends to successfully meet this demand on our health care system?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, there will always be some wait times for some procedures, but I can give one example of what we are doing to reduce wait times, and that is to do with the additional $5 million to the QE2 for its cardiovascular program. That is one issue that all the DHAs feel needed to be addressed, because the cardiac surgery done in Halifax is going to help the patients in all the DHAs by reducing the waiting list here. So that's one very concrete example of how we are going to be reducing a wait list this year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, in January of this year, there was a power outage in Richmond County which had affected a great part of the county. Speaker, the power outage lasted from about 2 o'clock in the morning till about 11 o'clock the very next day. Mr. Speaker, one of the places impacted by this, along with many others, was the Foyer Saint-Joseph, which is a seniors housing unit located in Petit de Gras, Richmond County. Mr. Speaker, as a result of the power being out for nearly 12 hours, there was no emergency lights, as the emergency lights at that facility are only geared to last for 45 minutes. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, as a result that it was in the winter, there had been a significant snowfall that evening, and many of the residents were unable to leave the facility in the morning because the snow was piled too high against the doors. Mr. Speaker, this potentially could have been a very dangerous situation for the residents inside. My question to the Minister responsible for housing: will the Minister please indicate what work has been done in regards to seniors housing units by his government to address the issue such as this, where backup generators may be required to avoid any such dangerous situations in the future?
Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and he's asked a very specific question, and I would like to get back to him on that one. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Richmond on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is not the first time that concerns have been raised about the status of seniors housing units throughout this province. I've already indicated on numerous occasions from various ministers the importance of having lifts in these housing units, especially the seniors housing units that have 2 stories or more, where seniors are very concerned about getting up the stairs and down the stairs with groceries, for example, or other items which they may need to bring upstairs. Mr. Speaker, We all know that this minister in the news has received $11 million from Ottawa to address housing concerns. There is only a number of seniors housing units throughout this province. Therefore, I ask today, what plan does the minister have to address the concerns at seniors housing units in this province, whether they be by providing backup generators for power outages, by providing lifts or elevators to these facilities throughout the province?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member opposite for the question. I also thank him for the opportunity to once again clarify how the money flows into housing in the province from the federal government. It goes through the Nova Scotia Housing Development Corporation, where we have we've built up a surplus over the last number of years, and the money that the member opposite was referring to is from that surplus. Mr. Speaker, as regards to our concerns about making sure that seniors have access to their residences, such as we can. We try to make sure that if there's a mobility problem on the part of the senior, that they're kept either in on the ground floor, or that they're in accommodations that have elevators. In terms of upgrades,
The member for Richmond on your final supplementary.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, with all due respect, whether a senior is mobile or not, when you don't have power for up to 12 hours, when your emergency lights only last for 45 minutes, and whereas the doors are blocked because of heavy snowfall, it doesn't matter whether you're mobile or not, you're in a very dangerous situation. Mr. Speaker, I have heard from family members from these residents. I've heard from the Foyer Saint-Joseph. I have no doubt it was the same situation at some of the other seniors units throughout Richmond County and in other places around this province. I ask again, will the minister commit today to implement a detailed plan that will put in place over time, whether it be generators, lifts, elevators into seniors housing units, so that we can avoid the situation of having this type of dangerous scenario for seniors in provincial housing units?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member opposite for allowing me to finish my answer to his first supplementary, and that is, in fact, we do try to allocate those additional resources across the province based on the need. Those are the very considerations that are looked at when it comes to installing elevators in seniors housing complexes. And in fact, I would assure the member opposite that, in fact, what he is asking for is presently being carried out within housing services. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the minister responsible for skyrocketing insurance. 5 days ago, Cabinet agreed to compensate the Children's Aid Society and Family Services of Colchester County and any other child and family services agency that they cannot obtain commercial liability insurance on the terms and conditions that are acceptable to the agency. The provincial offer to pay ends no later than December the 31st of this year. My question, what steps is the insurance minister taking to ensure that other important volunteers, community-based agencies know that the province is prepared to step forward and compensate them for their exposure to liability?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I do not know what the program is that Community Services, I believe the honourable member is telling me, funded for insurance. There are no plans at the present time to, as far as I know, to extend that to